as this trip goes on.
Back home now, let's go to the Assistant Minister to the Treasurer, Michael Sukkar. Michael, thanks so much for your time. Does the government stand by its numbers on the bank levy?
Oh, g'day, Kieran. Look, of course we do. I think there'd be a story here, Kieran, if the government wasn't accepting the numbers from Treasury. I think that would be quite a big story, a government not accepting the numbers that Treasury's provided. But of course, when we prepare our budgets, when we prepare our forward estimates, we take the advice of the Treasury. This has been the case for all governments, and we're no different. So, of course, we stick by our numbers, the numbers provided to us, advised to us from Treasury, and with all due respect, Kieran, I think there'd be a bit of a story here if we were not accepting their numbers.
Do you think they've got the numbers wrong, though, given the initial statements from the banks yesterday?
Well, Kieran, I think we have to take Treasury's numbers on face value. Of course, the banks will form a view on these things themselves, and some would argue the banks are in a pretty good position to determine what their own liabilities are. But as a government, rather than taking the advice of external stakeholders, it's our duty to take the advice of Treasury, and in this case, as in all other cases, it's no different. We've got to accept Treasury's numbers on this. Of course, it's always a bit more complicated when you've got a new tax or a new regime, something that's novel. This obviously hasn't been done before. This tax hasn't been levied in this way before. So there's always an element of uncertainty. But I think if you look at the recent track record of Treasury under this government, where we accept numbers, not sort of pie-in-the-sky numbers. We take a sober approach to the numbers we accept from Treasury. I think, of course, we have to stand by them. And let's not forget, Kieran, this is all about protecting our AAA credit rating. Perhaps if Bill Shorten had his way, and he seems to be espousing the bank's lines at the moment, perhaps we wouldn't be collecting any tax because this levy wouldn't be in place. So, of course, we accept the numbers, Kieran, and we'll find out in time how close the projections are to what is ultimately collected.
So it's a matter of wait and see and hope that they've got the numbers right. Otherwise, there's going to be quite a shortfall.
Well, Kieran, conversely, the projections could come in short of what's collected. I mean, this is the nature of projecting revenues into the future, and particularly when you're looking 4 years into the future over the forward estimates, and in some cases whether you cast forward over the decades. So I think this government, particularly Treasurer Scott Morrison, has a very good track record of taking a very sober approach to all of the assumptions that are built into revenue forecasts. We haven't made the mistake of the Labor Party, the shadow Treasurer Chris Bowen and Wayne Swan, who always took the pie-in-the-sky numbers, the most optimistic numbers. We've always taken a very sober approach, and I think on that basis we can have confidence that the numbers that we've accepted from Treasury are going to come pretty close to the mark.
Last night at the 75th anniversary event for the Menzies speech on the forgotten people, the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott said, "We must avoid the false fairness war," just as he says Bob Menzies cautioned against the false class war in that address 75 years ago. He says we must now avoid the false fairness war. What does he mean by that?
Oh, Kieran, you'd have to ask Tony Abbott what he meant when he said that.
It's not clear to you, given it comes just a couple of weeks after Scott Morrison framed a budget on the issue of fairness.
Well, I'm not going to try and interpret anyone else's comments. You may recall, Kieran, when you and I were speaking last week, I did speak about fairness myself, and I said we are a government who believes in fairness for taxpayers too. We believe in fairness for the people who are getting up at 6 a.m. every day and working 12 hours, paying their taxes, lawfully going about their business. We think that we have to be fair to them as well, and that's why we are so focused on growing the economy, ensuring that there's strong jobs growth, and over time getting taxes down. Unlike the Labor Party, we don't believe that you can keep going back to Australian workers and just keep squeezing more and more taxes out of them. So We've seen the Labor Party now have adopted a policy of effectively a highest marginal tax rate of 50%, which says you work one day for us and one day for yourself. We don't think that's fair. So in that sense, Kieran, my comments about fairness last week also critiqued the idea of fairness, and coalition budgets are always fair, not only fair to those who deserve and rightly expect a strong social welfare safety net, but also the people that fund the system, the people who are working their guts out every single day.
Sure.
They're the people we've got to be fair to as well.
But you're making this case, and you and the Treasurer, the Prime Minister, trying to make that case, and yet you've got the former PM suggesting that it might be on a false foundation. He says you've got to avoid the false fairness war. It looks like a dig to me.
That's your interpretation, Kieran. I didn't interpret those comments in that way, but I mean, you're free to interpret it however you like. As I said, our view is, yes, we've got to be fair to all Australians. We've got to be fair to the people who rightly expect services from government, but equally, we've got to be fair to the people who are working hard to fund the system. The people who are actually, through their own hard work, are the ones that carry the whole system of government. And for those taxpayers, we, unlike Bill Shorten and the Labor Party, don't think that you can keep shaking them down for more money. We think they already pay a decent amount of tax, and you can't keep going back to that well. But as we see from the Labor Party, when you don't have the guts to say no to spending measures, you've got to go back to those people time and time again, and we don't think that's fair, and I don't think anyone in the coalition thinks it's fair to keep saying to law-abiding, hard-working citizens, we want more and more of your own money.
Yeah. This surely would be, you'd hope that you could avoid any sign of internal discord right now, given Labor's showing its first signs of just that this week with the issue over the Medicare levy. The majority of the shadow cabinet wanted to back the government on this. Surely the focus needs to be all on the opposition and that issue, which some within Labor have told me comes down to an issue of backing the universality of Medicare, and you're undermining it by not supporting it. And yet, Bill Shorten, Tanya Plibersek, the leadership group, pushing ahead with it. As I say, wouldn't you hope that you could avoid any sign of internal discord just at this moment?
Well, I can assure you, Kieran, there is no internal discord, unlike in the Labor Party. And I mean, I think the problem for caucus members of the Labor Party is they've seen their leader at his worst, a person who doesn't really stand for anything, doesn't believe in anything. It's all about politics. It's all about this sort of negative approach of opposition, even if it's at the expense of the Australian economy, Australian individuals. And I suspect that members of the Labor Party caucus are feeling pretty bad right now that their leader is someone that doesn't stand for anything. So I could understand why there is internal discord in the Labor Party. Unlike the Labor Party, we have a leader in Malcolm Turnbull who is willing to make difficult decisions in the national interest, and someone who has values that he stands for. And as a member of his team, unlike members of the Labor Party, I'm very proud that he does take difficult decisions that are in the best interests of the country.
Michael Sukkar, appreciate your time as always.